How many times have you heard Bible stories about love, faith, and redemption? Now, what if I told you there's a story within the pages of the Bible that challenges everything you expect from a sacred narrative? Judges 19 is one of those stories. Intense, brutal, and unsettling. And if you think the Bible is just a manual of good deeds, brace yourself for a surprise. This is the account that exposes the darkest and rawest side of humanity, revealing the impact of bad decisions, moral decay, and the consequences of a society without leadership. You're about to encounter a narrative many would prefer to ignore, but one that, in fact, sheds an important light on the role of leadership and morality in the Old Testament. What does this story teach us about the consequences of sin and the real cost of vengeance? Why is it so shocking, and why must you know it to better understand the Bible? Stay with me, and let's explore the layers and hidden lessons of this shocking Bible story that, once known, will never be forgotten. The story of Judges 19 is undoubtedly one of the Bible's most impactful and unsettling narratives. It begins with an intensity that almost takes the reader's breath away, revealing the darkest side of an era where morality was fragile and decisions questionable. Reading something like this, a shocking Bible story, exposes a raw layer of human reality, reminding us that even the sacred pages do not avoid dealing with the worst aspects of the human condition. Indeed, an unexpected Bible reading like this prompts reflection. How can such stories be forgotten when they are so relevant to our inner conflicts and daily choices? This episode, filled with disturbing scenes, warns those who read it that the Bible isn't composed solely of tranquil moments or easy lessons. The story of Judges 19 reminds us that morality isn't defined merely by the absence of evil, but also by the choices made when confronted with it. It's an unexpected Bible reading that tests our values and challenges us to interpret how morality in the Bible addresses these dark nuances. And it's intriguing to consider how this story connects with our reality, where the dilemma of right and wrong also tests us daily, isn't it? Revisiting these ancient accounts, we find lessons that resonate even today. The shocking Bible story of Judges 19-21 feels like an urgent reminder of the consequences of sin and what happens in a society without structure. Rather than simply a story for understanding, this account invites introspection and practical application. After all, it's a doorway for us to reflect. What would happen in our lives and society if there were no leadership or sense of collective justice? And without immediate conclusion, the narrative leaves us with an unsettling question, almost a whisper of what's next. In Judges 19, we find a Levite who, in a personal and moral journey, decides to bring back his concubine who had left him. This seemingly simple decision opens the way for a series of dark and highly consequential events. It's striking how this shocking Bible story deals with themes of loyalty and betrayal while forcing us to confront the consequences of sin. On this journey, the reader doesn't just follow a story but is led to reflect on the dangers of decisions that seem small but carry great risks. This event highlights a harsh reality. Even in biblical times, there was vulnerability in relationships marked by failure and tense reconciliations. The Levite, in search of his concubine, ends up pulled into a scenario of violence and chaos he couldn't have anticipated. This narrative leads us to ponder morality in the Bible, and how often a single decision can unfold consequences affecting not only the decision-maker but everyone around them. Perhaps we've experienced something similar ourselves, where a return, a reconciliation, opened doors to the unexpected. The outcome of this decision reflects immersion in Israel's moral decay, making it clear that each step bears weight. By the end of this piece of ancient stories of Israel, a shadow seems to hang over the Levite's actions, showing that morally complex choices always return to demand a price. This plot makes us ask, what would we be willing to risk to reclaim something that feels lost? The story continues relentlessly, making us think that perhaps the darkness of this narrative is far from over. The lack of leadership in Israel at this time is a central element in Judges 19, and its impact is devastating. Without a king or figure to set directives and order morality, chaos takes over. This context of lawlessness serves as a powerful reminder of how a community without authority can easily lose itself in selfishness and impunity. In a shocking Bible story like this, we see how much leadership makes a difference in people's daily lives. Without it, the consequences of bad decisions multiply, with repercussions that seem nearly endless. When there is no clear direction, the sense of responsibility dissolves, and morality is left to chance. This chaotic period in Israel leads us to reflect on leadership and morality, how essential a strong presence is to maintaining a just and cohesive society. Without this pillar, we see the history of the tribe of Benjamin begin to unravel, plunging into a spiral of violence and disunity. Perhaps this absence of leadership is something that still echoes in our current society, where a lack of good examples leads many astray. This part of the Judges narrative shows that where leadership is absent, what remains is unrestrained freedom, an open door to disorder. Personal choices take on disastrous proportions and soon spread, affecting the whole community. In an unexpected Bible reading, the book of Judges warns us of the destructive power of anarchy and the need for a figure to guide the people. Though the drama of this passage takes us to intense moments, it only begins to outline the consequences of lack of direction. And could this absence be reversed? Returning to his land, the Levite and his concubine find shelter in the city of Gibeah, where an act of hospitality quickly turns into a nightmare. This part of the shocking Bible story in Judges 19 shocks any reader, showing how a lack of safety and abuse of hospitality can destroy trust in a community. Being welcomed by a host initially promised a peaceful outcome, but the darkness of the acts that followed reveals the moral decay of a city without boundaries. What should have been a simple act of kindness quickly becomes a testament to how the society of Gibeah was crumbling. The host offers shelter but fails to protect his guests from the cruelty of the residents. Here, the morality in the Bible exposes the contrast between the duty of welcoming a stranger and the corruption that had overtaken the people. And if we're honest, the reflection is chilling. What happens when a community abandons the basic sense of compassion and respect? This scene of corrupted hospitality shows how a society without control can fall into a cycle of violence and hatred. It's a painful lesson of the consequences of sin that transcends time, since the lack of empathy remains an open wound in many places. The reader is led to a point of no return, where the narrative only intensifies the suspense and leaves us questioning. How can something that began with good intentions end in such a profound tragedy? The story in Judges 19 reveals Israel's brutal moral decay, where violence reaches unimaginable levels. The citizens of Gibeah, driven by inhuman impulses, choose actions that defy any concept of justice and compassion. This point in the narrative is where morality in the Bible becomes a dark mirror of what happens in a society when people lose the basic sense of respect and dignity. It's as if Judges 19 were screaming a warning to everyone. Without limits, humanity is capable of the worst atrocities. The moral decline of Gibeah is not just a stain on Israel's history. It's an example of the impact of bad decisions, and what happens when a community allows evil to flourish without consequence. In an unexpected Bible reading, this passage teaches us what happens when values are neglected. After all, how many times do we witness in our society the destructive effects of selfish and violent actions? Perhaps unknowingly, we too have normalized harmful behaviors in our daily lives. This account leads us to reflect on how individual choices can become a collective threat, corrupting everything around them. In Lessons from Judges 19, we see that the immorality of a few can spread like poison, affecting everyone. And as the narrative unfolds, the reader senses something even darker awaits, an inevitable consequence hanging over those involved. After the tragedy, the Levite takes a shocking action, sending a message of vengeance and despair across Israel. This symbolic act, as he sends parts of his concubine's body to the tribes, reveals the weight of the consequences of sin and the desperation of a society in crisis. In a deep Bible study of Judges 19, we realize how this extreme act expresses not only the Levite's personal pain but also awakens a collective fury. It's a brutal call, uniting the tribes in a thirst for justice, though justice here is filled with blood and fury. The Levite's gesture symbolizes more than a simple summons. It represents how deeply sin has corroded the moral fabric and peace of the people. This act of sending pieces of the victim across the territories is one of the most striking moments of the shocking Bible story in Judges. An event so impactful it makes us ponder the history of Israel and the limits vengeance can reach. How often in real life do we witness extreme acts that, even if motivated by justice, end up entangled in revenge and destruction? This shocking and symbolic response not only summons a war but exposes Israel's moral wounds in an irreversible way. The Levite's action leads the entire nation to a moment of reflection on their sins and the role each one plays in collective moral decay. Yet at the same time, this scene leaves a troubling question. Will this eruption of outrage be enough to bring redemption, or merely more darkness? The tribes of Israel's indignation culminates in a devastating conflict, with collective wrath descending upon the tribe of Benjamin, nearly leading it to extinction. This moment of war is a clear example of the consequences of sin, which, though initially aimed at seeking justice, results in unchecked destruction. In the history of the tribe of Benjamin, we see how anger and a desire for retaliation can grow to a point where the solution seems as terrible as the original crime. What began as a quest for justice ends in a grim scene of annihilation. This war is not a typical battle. It reflects the profound rupture sin caused in Israel, irreversibly dividing the people. The shocking Bible story illustrates how resentment can contaminate an entire community, where the goal of justice is lost in the heat of vengeance. As the tribes face off, the deep Bible study invites us to reflect on the impact of decisions driven by anger. How often, in our own conflicts, do we let emotions blind us, causing us to lose sight of the original purpose? The near extinction of Benjamin is a harsh and somber lesson about the effect of sin and violence. However, this extreme act of retaliation leaves a latent question. Is the price of justice truly worth the destruction of a part of ourselves? The narrative proceeds with a disturbing suspense, making us realize that the story has more to reveal. The consequences of this conflict among Israel's tribes go beyond what anyone could have foreseen, resulting in a suffering that echoes throughout the people. The impact of this war is a painful reminder of the unforeseen consequences that arise when anger becomes uncontrolled. Instead of simply correcting a wrong, Israel creates new problems, deepening internal divisions. The shocking Bible story of Judges 19-21 becomes a real lesson on how impulsive decisions often generate more pain than resolution. At this point, the narrative becomes a deep Bible study on the unexpected consequences our actions can create. In seeking justice, Israel nearly eradicates one of its tribes, the tribe of Benjamin. This episode makes us reflect on leadership and morality, and how, in a society without firm leadership, the desire to do right can easily be lost. Perhaps we've seen this in our own lives when a well-intentioned decision resulted in greater harm than the initial problem. In the end, the suffering caused by this war is something that spreads among all the tribes, not only to the defeated. And so, the impact of bad decisions leaves a profound mark, with lessons that resonate to this day about the price of wrong choices. But even with all this, the story suggests that there may still be a path to reconciliation and redemption, even amidst judgment. After the devastation, the narrative of Judges 19-21 offers a glimpse of redemption, even as the shadow of judgment still hangs over Israel. The people, recognizing the near extinction of the tribe of Benjamin, decide to give the survivors a chance to endure. This act of mercy amid so much suffering reflects the complexity of morality in the Bible, where compassion emerges even after the consequences of such brutal sin. It's an unexpected Bible reading, reminding us how grace can appear in the darkest hours. The decision to preserve the tribe of Benjamin is more than a gesture of kindness. It's an act of reconciliation that repairs a nation in ruins. In this deep Bible study of Israel's history, we see that despite errors and moral decay, there is always room for a new beginning. The survival of Benjamin, though close to extinction, represents the promise that God allows repentance and redemption to emerge, regardless of the depth of sin. Who hasn't, in a moment of error, longed for a second chance? Finally, this last scene of compassion brings an unexpected but necessary closure to the history of the tribe of Benjamin. It's a reminder that even in the worst times, there's still a way back. But the judge's narrative doesn't leave us only with this reflection. It plants the seed of a question. How far are we willing to forgive, and what does it truly mean to us? Now that you know this story, how does it resonate in your life? Do you recognize situations where impulsive decisions or a lack of direction bring unexpected consequences? Judges 19 reminds us that the impact of bad choices isn't just individual. It affects everyone around us. This lesson can transform us, but it only becomes real when applied. Why not reflect? In which areas of your life could a deeper analysis of your choices benefit you? Where could you be a positive leader? If you enjoyed this study and want to continue exploring intense and insightful biblical themes, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's discover together what more these stories have to teach us about life and faith.